The Gestapo called her the most dangerous of all Allied spies. They distributed posters across occupied France with a simple, terrifying warning. She is the Limping Lady. She is the most dangerous of all Allied spies. We must find her and eliminate her.
They didn't know her real name. They didn't know she was an American. They only knew that everywhere this woman went, German supply lines exploded, prison doors swung open, and the French resistance grew into a nightmare for the Third Reich. This is the story of Virginia Hall, a woman who was rejected by her own government, hunted by the Butcher of Lyon, and who changed the course of World War II on a single wooden leg.
Virginia Hall was never meant to be a spy. Born in 1906 to a wealthy family in Baltimore, Maryland, she was a woman who defied every expectation of her era. She was brilliant, fiercely independent, and fluent in multiple languages.
While her peers were looking for husbands, Virginia was looking at the horizon. She studied in Paris and Vienna, eventually landing a job as a clerk for the American Embassy in Warsaw. Her dream was to become a diplomat, a career path almost entirely closed to women in the 1930s.
Then tragedy struck. During a bird hunting trip in Turkey, Virginia tripped. Her shotgun discharged, blasting her left leg below the knee. In an era before modern antibiotics, gangrene set in. To save her life, doctors had to amputate her leg. For most, this would have been the end of a career in the field. For Virginia, it was just a complication. She named her new wooden prosthetic Cuthbert and went back to work. But the United States State Department was cold. They had a rule against hiring amputees for diplomatic roles. They told her she was finished. They were wrong. When the Nazis invaded France in 1940, Virginia was in Paris. She didn't flee. She stayed, driving an ambulance for the French army under heavy fire until the country surrendered. She escaped to London, but she wasn't looking for safety. She was looking for a way back in.
She had a chance encounter with a British intelligence officer who noticed her ferocity and her fluency in French. Within weeks, she was recruited into the Special Operations Executive, or the SOE, a secret organization ordered by Winston Churchill to set Europe ablaze.
In 1941, Virginia Hall became the first female operative to be sent into occupied France. Her cover was as a reporter for the New York Post. Because America was still technically neutral at the time, she could move with a degree of freedom that British agents couldn't. She settled in Lyon, a city that would become the heart of the French resistance.
She wasn't just a messenger. Virginia was a mastermind. Under the codename Marie Monine, she organized the fragmented groups of the resistance. She established safe houses, mapped out drop zones for weapons and explosives, and set up an escape network for downed Allied pilots.
She was a master of disguise. One day she was a wealthy socialite. The next she was a milkmaid with dyed hair and a shuffled gait to hide her limp. Her greatest weapon was her invisibility. The Germans, steeped in their own prejudices, couldn't conceive that a woman, let alone a disabled woman, could be the architect of the sabotage crumbling their infrastructure. But as the body count of German officers rose and more trains were derailed, the Gestapo realized someone was coordinating the chaos.
The man tasked with finding her was Klaus Barbie, the infamous Butcher of Lyon. Barbie was a monster known for his cruelty, but he met his match in Virginia. He obsessed over her. He knew there was a woman with a limp directing the shadows, but she always stayed one step ahead. When the United States finally entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Virginia's cover as a neutral reporter was blown. She became a woman without a country, operating in the middle of a literal hornet's nest. The situation in Lyon became critical in late 1942. The Germans occupied the previously free zone of France, and Barbie's net was closing. Virginia received word that she was about to be burned. She had to leave, but there were no planes and no boats. There was only the mountains. On a cold November night, Virginia Hall began a 50-mile trek across the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain. It was a journey that would break a professional athlete. For Virginia, it was an agony we can barely imagine.
She was hiking through waist-deep snow in freezing temperatures on a heavy wooden prosthetic that chafed her stump until it bled.
At one point, she managed to send a radio message back to her handlers in London, telling them that she hoped Cuthbert wouldn't be a problem. The reply from the SOE, unaware that Cuthbert was her leg, was, "If Cuthbert is troublesome, have him eliminated." She made it. She collapsed in Spain, was briefly imprisoned for not having a visa, and eventually made her way back to London. She was a hero, but she was frustrated. The SOE refused to send her back to France, fearing she was too recognizable.
Virginia didn't listen. She left the British SOE and joined the American equivalent, the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS. She demanded to go back. This time, there would be no reporter's cover. She would go back as a peasant.
She had her teeth filed down to look like a French farm woman. She dyed her hair gray. She learned to shuffle in a way that hid the rhythmic thud of her wooden leg.
In 1944, months before D-Day, Virginia Hall was smuggled back into France by a small boat. Her mission was to prepare the way for the Allied invasion. She moved to the Haute-Loire region, posing as an elderly goat herder. Under the noses of the German garrison, she began training 3 battalions of resistance fighters. She was no longer just an organizer. She was a commander. She lived in barns, slept on hay, and spent her nights receiving parachute drops of heavy weaponry. When the news of the Normandy landings broke, Virginia gave the order. Her units launched a scorched earth campaign against the retreating Germans. They blew up bridges, severed telephone lines, and ambushed convoys. Her reports to headquarters were clinical. 150 Germans killed, 500 captured, 4 bridges destroyed. By the time the regular Allied army reached her sector, Virginia's irregulars had already liberated the area. After the war, Virginia Hall became a ghost. She was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the only one given to a civilian woman in World War II. General William Donovan wanted to have a public ceremony, but Virginia refused. She joined the newly formed CIA in 1947, becoming one of its first female intelligence officers. But the transition to peacetime was difficult. The agency was a boys' club, and many of the young officers had no idea that the quiet woman sitting at the desk next to them was the legendary Limping Lady. She retired in 1966, rarely speaking of her exploits, even to her family. Virginia Hall died in 1982 at the age of 76. For decades, her story remained tucked away in classified files and forgotten memoirs.
But history has a way of finding its heroes. Today, she is recognized as one of the greatest spies in American history. A woman who was told she wasn't good enough because of her gender and her disability, yet who became the one person the Third Reich feared most. She proved that courage isn't the absence of a struggle, but the refusal to let that struggle define you. Virginia Hall was a shadow, a warrior, and a reminder that true power often limps quietly through the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike.